Scott McLaughlin has just been stripped of his pole position from the Bathurst 1000, and the team has been fined $30,000 for breaching the engine specification document. So just to backtrack, this is concerning the qualifying engine that Scott McLaughlin used at the Bathurst 1000. Just talk us through what's happened in terms of Supercars and why this has been referred to the stewards. A hearing just being completed this weekend here at Sandown.
This is highly complex and highly controversial, Jess. You and I just got a 5-page document from the officials as a steward's decision. It comes as a consequence of 6 engines being taken from Bathurst and randomly, not just the podium cars, but also other random cars, as we normally do. We've taken those engines and dyno tested them. So that's within the regulations. The engines are sealed, they're taken to Craig Hasted's facility in Queensland, and he basically checks the specification of the engines by dynoing them and fitting within the power limits that we effectively homologate each engine. So each team and for each manufacturer have an homologation process, and those engines were sampled against that. There's also an engine specification document that goes with each of the homologations for the respective engines. As a consequence, all of the racing engines were cleared. So that's very important. So all of the racing engines, especially the DJR Team Penske engines for car 12 and 17, were cleared and no problem at all. There was an irregularity with car 17's qualifying engine only.
Which they changed on the Saturday night before Bathurst. They actually ran a different engine in the race on Sunday.
Exactly. Now, the reason that they took that engine out was that they were getting water in the oil, and it was a precautionary change. So it wasn't a planned change. They changed the engine because they didn't think that it would make the 1,000 Ks. Now, as a consequence of that, what has actually happened is in the inspection, so the engine was dynoed and then it's been dismantled, and when the engine has been further inspected, it's effectively overlift. So each of the ESD or the engine specification documents have the valve lift stated within the documents. 3 of the cylinders, of the 8 cylinders, were overlift. So what they've done in the end, after looking at that, is said, well, there's a clear breach of the engine specification document, and that's why the penalties that you just relayed have taken place. So effectively, what they've done is stripped Scott from pole position, and that will go now to Chaz Mostert, who was second on the grid. They've said that he will go to the rear of the grid in today's race, race 30, and they will also penalise the team in a monetary sense, $30,000. That will be the fine for the breach, for the infringement.
Let's get a reaction now from team principal at Team Penske. Tim Cindric is standing by for us with Greg Murphy. Murph?
I'm here with Tim Cindric, president of Team Penske. Tim, just been a bit of news come to hand around a penalty that's been applied to car 17 from Bathurst. Can you give us a little bit more information about that, please?
Well, obviously it's a very unfortunate circumstance. I think if you read our statement and you read that, the steward's report, it pretty much sums up, the entire situation. And for us, it's certainly something that we want to put behind us. And really, the focus of our day going forward is to, have a good day here at Sandown and continue to work our way forward in this championship.
But a few of the facts are, it was around a qualifying engine at Bathurst in the 17 car and a little irregularity that was found afterwards.
Yeah, again, I think our statement covers that quite clearly as far as what we feel occurred, and then the steward's statement covers that in much more detail.
And as far as the penalty that has been applied, how do you see that?
Well, we don't plan to appeal. Again, I said that we plan to just focus on going forward with today's race. But yeah, any penalty is an unfortunate one, and from a team's perspective, we certainly apologize to Scott, to Alex, and everybody else involved that we're in this position right now. But the facts are we are, and we'll go forward and we'll focus on today.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you.
Team principal from Team Penske, Tim Cindric, they're giving us a statement, and the team have put out a statement just a few moments ago, and I'll paraphrase it for you. We're confident that the build sheet of this engine indicated that it left our engine provider with measurements that were well under the allowable maximum valve lift stated within the engine specification document. It was also confirmed by Supercars that the control camshaft rockers and all other components and measurements used in the engine were ones that were permitted with our engine spec document. The steward's report confirmed that there was clearly no intent from our team to circumvent the rules, and that there was no evidence that we benefited from any performance advantage as the engine passed the Supercars power tests on their dyno post-event, returning results that did not exceed the accumulated power number nor the engine power weighted average number. It's important to make note of the fact that there was no intent.
Well, I think that there's no intent, and secondly, it didn't breach the power regulation that we have, Jess. So what we do with the homologation via the engine specification documents is when the engines are homologated for supercar racing, they're effectively within an envelope of a maximum power threshold. So when that engine was dynoed and checked, it didn't breach that power number. So the irregularity is a purely specification issue. When the engine was inspected, it didn't breach the power number. So I'm sure that's why, and I'm saying only, I'm sure that's why it was only $30,000, because it would have been a lot more than that if it actually breached the engine power number that we say is our threshold, our window.
Well, in the steward's report, they say in this case there is no evidence from which we could conclude that the breach was deliberate or known, and that was absolutely taken into consideration when those penalties were handed down. I guess the question begs, Mark, why has it taken so long to get to this point? Bathurst was in October. We're now in November. We've had another race meeting in between. Why has it taken this amount of time to come to this conclusion and for a penalty to be handed down?
So this is complex. So when all those engines, as I said at the start, that were sampled at the end of Bathurst, they go back to Craig Haysted's facility, and all the technical department of Supercars are then, it's in their world. It's basically, you know, like a parc fermé condition, those engines. When they've been tested, those engines from Bathurst had to go back to the teams and then reused. So of the engines that were sampled, all of them, bar the engine that was the qualifying engine from Scott's car, all had to go back to the respective teams and then used at the Gold Coast. So it's then taken past the Gold Coast to properly inspect the engine that they had some issues around. So that's why there's been a timing delay.
And that's a really important part of the story, because I'm sure that will be a question that many of the fans have.